The Montana wind cut like a blade across the high plains as Barney Fletcher crawled through the buffalo grass, his hands crushed beyond recognition, his blacksmith's tools scattered and broken behind him. The autumn air carried the scent of dying grass and distant snow, while overhead, storm clouds gathered like dark omens against the endless sky. At 57, the former cavalry farrier had shod horses for 3 different forts, forged weapons that won battles, and spent 30 years keeping the frontier army mobile and armed. His weathered face bore the scars of countless sparks from the forge, and his massive shoulders spoke of decades spent wielding heavy hammers and wrestling stubborn iron into submission. But he'd never expected to be beaten and maimed by his own commanding officer, betrayed for the crime of refusing to forge evidence that would justify a massacre of peaceful Crow families. The memory of that confrontation burned in his mind like molten steel. The way Colonel Bradshaw's eyes had gone cold when Barney refused his orders. The casual cruelty in the officer's voice as he condemned an innocent village to death for the sake of political convenience. "You're too sentimental for military service, Fletcher." Colonel Bradshaw had snarled as his men held Barney down and smashed his hands with sledgehammers, each blow calculated to destroy not just bone and sinew, but the very essence of what made him valuable to the army. The sound of his own bones breaking had echoed in the blacksmith shop like gunshots, while Bradshaw watched with the detached interest of a man observing a particularly effective interrogation technique. This army's got no use for smiths who can't tell the difference between duty and Indian sympathy. The duty had been Bradshaw's elaborate plan to plant weapons on a peaceful Crow village and claim they were planning an uprising, justifying a preemptive strike that would clear valuable grazing land for his cattle ranching cronies back east. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Forge a few dozen tomahawks and arrowheads with deliberately crude workmanship, scatter them around the village during a routine patrol, then return with overwhelming force to eliminate the threat before it could materialize. When Barney refused to forge the fake weapons needed for the deception, pointing out that his oath as a soldier included protecting innocent civilians, Bradshaw had decided that a training accident would solve his problem permanently. Should have stuck to shoeing horses instead of playing conscience. Bradshaw had laughed as they loaded Barney's broken body onto a supply wagon and dumped him in the wilderness like a sack of damaged goods. The colonel's laughter had followed him into the darkness, a sound as cold and merciless as the Montana wind. "Maybe the wolves will appreciate your moral principles more than the United States Army." Now Barney dragged himself through the sage and bunch grass, his ruined hands useless for anything but crawling. His vision blurred from pain and the bitter cold of a Montana autumn that promised an early winter. Blood from his wounds left a trail through the grass, and he could hear coyotes calling in the distance, drawn by the scent of injury and desperation. His cavalry uniform was torn and stained, the blue wool that had once marked him as a defender of civilization now serving only as a shroud for his dying hopes. In the distance, through the haze of pain and exhaustion, he spotted smoke rising from a hidden valley, the first sign of warmth and human habitation he'd seen since crawling away from Bradshaw's brutality. The smoke rose straight and steady, suggesting a well-tended fire and people who knew how to survive in this harsh country. With the last of his strength, Barney began crawling toward that distant promise of shelter, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through his shattered hands. The trading post sat beside a natural hot spring, surrounded by corrals and workshops that spoke of someone who understood the value of skilled craftsmanship and the importance of being self-sufficient on the frontier. Steam rose from the mineral-rich water, creating an oasis of warmth in the cold mountain air, while the buildings showed the careful construction of someone who planned to stay and prosper rather than simply survive. Barney collapsed at the forge, his blood staining the anvil that had been his life's work, the familiar weight and shape of the iron block offering a strange comfort even in his extremity. The woman working at the bellows looked up at his approach, tall and strong, with graying blonde hair braided with leather and beads, her features marking her as mixed blood, part white and part Crow. She wore buckskin and wool in practical layers that spoke of someone who understood both cultures and chose the best from each. And her blue-gray eyes held the steady competence of someone who'd learned to survive by mastering every skill the frontier demanded. Her hands were calloused from honest work, and she moved with the confident grace of someone completely at home in her environment. "Great Spirit, preserve us," she breathed, dropping her hammer and rushing to his side with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to frontier emergencies. Her voice carried the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language, though she spoke it with perfect fluency. "What happened to you? Who did this?" "Army," Barney gasped through gritted teeth, each word a struggle against the pain that threatened to drag him into unconsciousness. "My own commanding officer tried to kill me, refusing orders." The woman, he'd later learn her name was Rebecca Raven Whitehorse, helped him toward her cabin with surprising gentleness for someone so strong, supporting his weight while being careful not to jar his injured hands. Her home was well organized and comfortable, with a mixture of frontier furniture and traditional Crow crafts that spoke of someone proud of her mixed heritage and determined to honor both sides of her ancestry. Buffalo robes covered handmade chairs, while traditional beadwork decorated practical wool blankets, creating a space that was both beautiful and functional. "Your own officer did this to your hands?" she asked, examining the damage with fingers that moved with surprising skill, her touch gentle but thorough as she assessed the extent of his injuries. Her medical knowledge was clearly extensive, combining frontier practicality with traditional healing wisdom. "Caught him planning massacre," Barney managed, his voice growing stronger as the warmth of the cabin began to penetrate his chilled body. "Peaceful Crow village. Didn't appreciate my interference with his genocide." Rebecca's expression darkened with recognition and barely controlled anger. She'd seen this kind of beating before, the systematic brutality of men who believed their cause justified any cruelty, the calculated violence designed to destroy not just the body but the spirit. "Soldiers," she said bitterly, her voice carrying years of accumulated pain and loss. "Always ready to kill when talking might work better. Always choosing the sword over the olive branch." For 2 months, Barney lay helpless while Rebecca tended his wounds with a mixture of frontier medicine and traditional Crow healing practices, her care as skilled as any army surgeon, but tempered with genuine compassion. His hands would never be right again. The bones were too badly shattered, the tendons too damaged. But she managed to preserve enough function for him to grip simple tools, and perhaps, with time and determination, return to some form of his craft. She fed him broths made from wild herbs and game, changed his bandages with materials that promoted healing, and slowly nursed him back from the edge of death. During his recovery, Barney learned about the woman who'd saved his life. Rebecca was a master of adaptation, someone who'd learned that survival in the mountains required excellence in every trade and the wisdom to know when to fight and when to negotiate. She could shoe a horse, repair a rifle, negotiate a trade agreement, or track game through country that would challenge the best army scouts. Her trading post served both white settlers and Indian tribes, providing a neutral ground where different cultures could meet and exchange goods without the suspicion and hostility that marked most frontier interactions. When Barney finally sat up clear-headed, his strength slowly returning under Rebecca's careful ministrations, he found her working at her forge, shaping horseshoes and tools with the skill of a master craftsman. Her movements were precise and economical, and she worked with the confidence of someone who'd learned that survival in the mountains required excellence in every trade. The ring of her hammer on the anvil was music to his ears, a sound that spoke of honest work and useful purpose. "You're a smith," he observed, watching her work with the appreciation of someone who understood the craft's demands and complexities. "I'm whatever I need to be," Rebecca replied, not looking up from her anvil as she shaped a piece of red-hot iron with practiced strokes. "Smith, trader, peacemaker, healer, out here, you learn all the skills or you don't survive long. Specialization is a luxury for people who live in cities." Her story emerged slowly, revealed in fragments during long winter evenings, as they sat by the fire, and shared the kind of deep conversations that develop between people who've both faced death and found unexpected salvation. Rebecca was the daughter of a Crow medicine woman and a Scottish blacksmith, raised in both traditions until the Indian Wars forced her to choose sides in a conflict that recognized no middle ground. She'd married a cavalry sergeant who'd been murdered by the same kind of righteous officers who'd beaten Barney, leaving her to survive alone in country that trusted neither Indians nor half-breeds. "White men think I'm a savage," she explained, organizing her tools with practiced efficiency, while the firelight played across her weathered features. "Crow think I'm a traitor for marrying a soldier. I walk between two worlds and belong to neither, making my own path through country that wants to claim me for one side or the other." Barney told her about Bradshaw's conspiracy, the planned massacre, the years of faithful service repaid with treachery and violence. Rebecca listened without judgment, occasionally nodding as if she'd heard similar stories before, her expression growing darker as she understood the full scope of the Colonel's planned atrocity. "This Colonel Bradshaw," she said finally, her tone thoughtful but edged with steel. "He thinks murder will solve his problems, that genocide is just another tool of military strategy." "He thinks I'm a fool for believing in honor over expedience," Barney replied, flexing his damaged hands and feeling the constant ache that would never fully leave him. Too naive to understand that the army is about conquest, not protection. Too sentimental to see that civilians are just obstacles to be cleared away. "Maybe he's right about one thing," Rebecca said, her tone thoughtful as she stared into the fire. "Maybe that kind of army is finished, at least in this country. Question is, what are you going to forge to replace it?" Their partnership began when a group of desperate homesteaders arrived seeking help with broken plows and damaged tools, their equipment destroyed by accidents that looked suspiciously like sabotage. The farmers were gaunt from poor harvests and constant harassment, their faces bearing the hollow look of people pushed to the edge of survival. Barney's knowledge of metalwork, combined with Rebecca's understanding of frontier survival and her connections in both white and Indian communities, allowed them to not only repair the damage but identify the culprits behind the systematic harassment. "You still know your trade," Rebecca observed as they watched the homesteaders return to their claims with properly functioning equipment and renewed hope in their eyes. "No metal, no fire, know how to shape things that last," Barney replied, flexing his damaged hands around a hammer handle and feeling the familiar weight that connected him to his life's work. "Out here, that's still worth something. Maybe worth more than it ever was in the army." Word spread through the Montana Territory about the trading post at Devil's Backbone, where Raven Whitehorse and the crippled Smith could solve problems that had stumped territorial authorities for years. They developed a reputation for fairness that extended from the Yellowstone to the Canadian border, becoming known as people who could mediate disputes between cultures that had been fighting for generations. More importantly, they found in each other something they'd both thought lost: companionship, respect, and the slow-burning warmth of mature love built on shared exile and mutual understanding. Their relationship developed gradually, built on shared work and common purpose, rather than passion alone, creating a bond that proved stronger than the prejudices that surrounded them. The confrontation with Colonel Bradshaw came 18 months later, when the snows had melted and the mountain passes were clear for travel. He arrived with a cavalry patrol and official orders, claiming Barney was a deserter who needed to be returned to military custody for court-martial. The colonel looked older, his face bearing the lines of a man under increasing pressure from his superiors, but his arrogance remained intact. "There's the traitor," Bradshaw announced, pointing at his former farrier with theatrical contempt. "Living in sin with a half-breed squaw, probably selling weapons to hostiles by now. Just what I'd expect from a man who puts Indian lives above military necessity." Barney stepped out of the trading post, no longer the broken man Bradshaw had left for dead in the wilderness. Hard work and purpose had strengthened his body, while finding his true calling had restored his spirit. His hands were twisted and scarred, but his back was straight and his voice strong with the confidence of a man who'd found his place in the world. "Colonel," he said calmly, his tone carrying none of the deference that military protocol demanded. "You're looking prosperous? The massacre business treating you well? How many innocent villages have you destroyed since we last met?" "Don't get smart with me, Fletcher. You're under arrest for desertion and treason against the United States of America." "Desertion?" Rebecca stepped out beside Barney, a rifle cradled in her arms with the casual competence of someone who knew how to use it. "Funny thing about that. I sent some messages to friends at Fort Shaw and Fort Benton. Seems the Army's been looking into your activities, Colonel. Very interested in your business dealings and your methods of land acquisition." Bradshaw's confidence wavered as he realized they'd been building a case against him for months, gathering evidence and testimony from witnesses across the territory. Rebecca's connections in both the white and Indian communities had provided access to witnesses and evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic corruption and planned genocide. "This is a setup," Bradshaw sputtered, his hand moving toward his saber as he realized the trap closing around him. "No," came a new voice from the ridge above them, speaking with the authority of someone accustomed to command. "This is justice." Chief Pretty Eagle emerged from the rocks with a dozen Crow warriors, their faces painted for war and their weapons ready for battle. They'd been tracking Bradshaw's movements since learning of his plans to attack their peaceful relatives, waiting for the right moment to confront the man who'd threatened their people. "You want to kill innocent people?" Pretty Eagle called out in perfect English, his voice carrying across the valley with the force of righteous anger. "Start with warriors instead of women and children. Face men who can fight back instead of murdering families in their sleep." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, with Bradshaw's patrol outnumbered and outgunned, facing not just angry Indians but federal investigators who'd been tracking his conspiracy for over a year. The air crackled with tension as both sides prepared for violence that seemed inevitable. "This isn't over," Bradshaw snarled, backing toward his horse as he realized his position was hopeless. "Yes, it is," came another new voice from the opposite ridge. A federal marshal rode into the valley, flanked by Army investigators and several angry ranchers who'd discovered Bradshaw's plan to steal their land as well as massacre the Indians. Bradshaw's empire crumbled quickly once federal authorities began examining his records and interviewing witnesses across the territory. His conspiracy had reached far beyond Indian affairs, involving land fraud, cattle rustling, and the systematic abuse of military authority for personal gain. He died in military prison 2 years later, still claiming he'd only been trying to protect white settlers from savage attacks. "Feel better?" Rebecca asked as they watched the federal party disappear over the mountain pass, taking Bradshaw and his co-conspirators to face justice in territorial courts. "Feel useful," Barney replied, flexing his damaged hands around a hammer and feeling the satisfaction of honest work well done. "For the first time since they crippled me, I feel like I'm building something that matters, something that will last." Their partnership deepened into something more profound than business or convenience, becoming a true marriage of minds and hearts that transcended the racial and cultural barriers that divided frontier society. They established a settlement that served both white homesteaders and Indian tribes, providing metalwork, trade goods, and mediation services for the complex disputes that arose when different cultures tried to share the same land. "We make quite a team," Rebecca observed one evening as they sat by the hot spring, watching the sunset paint the Montana peaks in brilliant reds and golds, while steam rose around them like incense. "We make a bridge," Barney corrected, taking her calloused hand in his scarred one and feeling the strength that flowed between them. "The kind that connects different worlds instead of dividing them. The kind that proves people can work together if they're willing to try." At 58, Barnabas Fletcher was no longer the broken-down farrier who'd been beaten and left for dead by a corrupt officer. He was a craftsman, a peacemaker, and living proof that true strength came from building rather than destroying, from creating rather than conquering. The mountains that had nearly claimed his life had instead given him purpose, partnership, and the chance to use his skills for something greater than mere military service. He'd found his true calling, not in serving an army that valued obedience over conscience, but in building bridges between communities that had been taught to see each other as enemies. And Rebecca Whitehorse had found something she'd thought impossible. Not just love, but belonging with someone who saw her mixed heritage as strength rather than weakness, who understood that walking between worlds required courage, wisdom, and the willingness to build bridges where others saw only barriers. Together, they'd carved out their own piece of the American dream in the rugged beauty of Montana, proving that sometimes the people society discards become the ones who forge the strongest bonds between divided communities. Their trading post became a landmark on the frontier, Devil's Backbone Station, where honest craftsmanship and cultural respect went hand in hand, where different peoples could meet as equals and find common ground. The cavalry still rode past their door, carrying orders and dispatches across the expanding West, but now they rode with equipment forged by people who understood that the strongest weapons are those that protect rather than destroy, built by hands that had learned to create rather than merely serve, guided by hearts that chose understanding over hatred and cooperation over conquest. In the end, Barney Fletcher had found something more valuable than military glory or official recognition. He'd found a way to use his skills in service of something larger than himself, building a legacy that would outlast any army and prove that the true strength of America lay not in its ability to conquer, but in its capacity to bring different peoples together in common cause.